Good morning. Well, my name's Richard and I'm really glad to be here with you this morning. Welcome. And I'm going to kick off with just a couple of images, a couple of slides. So let's have a look at the first one. And I want you to put in the chat, what do you see? When you look at this image, what do you see? Now, some of you might see an old person, old lady. Some of you might see something different. Some of you might see a younger lady looking away. Or you might actually see both, and you're sort of seeing one and then seeing the other and seeing the other. Let's have a look at a separate slide, another one. What do you see here? You can bung it in the chat. Do you just see a tree and a statue? Well, I imagine most of you would probably see a face looking out. And the reason I'm kicking off by showing these two images, that the picture hasn't changed. It's the same image that you're looking at, but your perception has changed. You're seeing something differently, even though the picture is exactly the same. And the title of this talk is called Seeing Jesus Differently. What if the presuppositions, what if the picture of Jesus that I have in my mind is actually not the whole picture? And we're going to look at this week, a couple of thousand years ago, Palm Sunday, the week before Easter. And we're going to look at different characters, different groups of people as they saw Jesus at that time. And what did they see when they saw Jesus? And of course, it wasn't Easter then or Palm Sunday. It was, and maybe we could look at the next slide here. This is looking down. It was, the story begins on the Mount of Olives, which is nearly 3,000 feet above sea level. I'd never realized it was that high. So as you come from the east over the Mount of Olives and you go down in the valley towards Jerusalem, you get an amazing view of the city. And this is a view pictorially put together of what it would have looked like 2,000 years ago. And this is the temple here and the rest of the city behind. And of course, this wasn't Easter they were coming up to. This was a similar festival. In fact, one of the first national festivals of the Jewish year, the Passover festival. And this was a festival that had to be celebrated as a nation in one place in Jerusalem. So there were people, pilgrims, gathering from all over the country to be there. You had to be there. And different households, there would be tens of thousands of people thronging in, coming in down into Jerusalem to celebrate the Passover. So I'm going to read, Jesus was one of those people coming in, but he was coming in a different way. And I'm just going to read the passage. This is in Luke's account of Jesus' life. And after that, we're going to do a little bit of behind the scenes background to it. So let's read that next. So this is in chapter 19. After Jesus had said this, he went on ahead, going up to Jerusalem. That's because he had to go up over the mount to get there. As he approached Bethphage and Bethany at the hill called the Mount of Olives, he sent two of his disciples, saying to them, "Go to the village ahead of you, and as you enter it, you will find a colt tied there, which no one has ever ridden. Untie it and bring it here. If anyone asks you why you're untying it, say, 'The Lord needs it.'" Those who were sent ahead went and found it just as he had told them. As they were untying the colt, its owners asked them, "Why are you untying the colt?" They replied, "The Lord needs it." And they brought it to Jesus, threw their cloaks on the colt, and put Jesus on it. Now, just to say at this point, this was something that, if you like, was like the red carpet treatment. This is something that you would do for somebody of royal descent. Would be somebody who rode on either a horse or a donkey that had not been ridden by anybody else. And as they went along, people spread their cloaks on the road, and that's a similar thing to do for somebody of a king or somebody regal. When he came near the place where the road goes down the Mount of Olives, the whole crowd of disciples began joyfully to praise God in loud voices for all the miracles they had seen. "Blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord. Peace in heaven and glory in the highest." Some of the Pharisees in the crowd said to Jesus, "Teacher, rebuke your disciples." "I tell you," he replied, "if they keep quiet, the stones will cry out." Well, we need to understand really what's going on. We need to go behind the scenes and get an idea of the historical and cultural background of what's going on here for us to really understand it. And if you like, get behind the eyes of some of those people seeing Jesus coming down that road into Jerusalem, because I want to see, what did they see? What was Jesus like to them as he came down? And I'm going to roll back 1,000 years. So this is just going to be really whistle-stop tour. This is 1,000 years before Jesus was there, so a bit 3,000 years from us, really. Time of King David. Now, this was like a golden era for the children of Israel. That they had come into their promised land. They had ownership of the land. They'd divided it up amongst them. They had a stable kingdom for most of David's reign and for all of his son Solomon's reign. Solomon built the temple in Jerusalem, and these were like the golden years for the nation, the years they looked back on and longed to have again. But things went pear-shaped after Solomon. The kingdom there was infighting, it was divided to a northern kingdom and a southern kingdom called Judah. And eventually the northern kingdom was taken into exile by Assyria and assimilated into the Assyrian Empire. And later on, Judah, about 400 BC, was taken into captivity by Babylon. And they were in captivity probably about 70 years, and then the Persian Empire came and took over the Babylonian Empire, and the Persians allowed the Jewish nation to come back, start to rebuild the city of Jerusalem, rebuild the walls, start to rebuild the temple, although that was nothing like the magnificent temple that Solomon had. And they came with great hope in their hearts. They came with the hope that they were going to re-establish a kingdom just like David's. They were looking and searching for a king who would do that for them. But it never happened, and their land was pretty well occupied right the way from then through to now. Not entirely, but they started off being occupied by the Persians, and then Alexander the Great from Greece came over and totally overwhelmed them with Greek culture, language. The Greek religious system was there for those who weren't Jews, and it really sort of took away the cultural background of their nation. Greek was the written language, Greek was the spoken language for anything official. And then eventually that died out, and they were occupied by Egypt and then Syria. And then there was a revolt called the Judas Maccabees, you may have heard of that, about 160 BC, who actually managed to establish this was their land that they were going to run, and he retook Jerusalem and some of the land around, and that lasted for about 100 years, but then that fell apart as well. So why am I telling you all this? I'm telling you all this because of the other thing, the Romans then came in about 60 BC, and I'm telling you this because this shaped this culture that Jesus was coming to. These were people who were searching and trying to establish something that they had hope in their hearts for, that somehow had never arrived. And there are different groupings in the Jewish nation at the time who were trying to find a way to make it right, trying to find a way to get back to that perfect kingdom of God. Now, what we're going to do is we're going to go, as it were, behind the scenes and look at different groupings and what did they see when they saw this man from Nazareth on a donkey coming down the road into Jerusalem. And we're going to start with the occupiers, with the Romans. So the Romans generally were on the coast at a place called Caesarea, and that's where Pontius Pilate's headquarters was, that's where his Roman troops were. But every Passover, at this festival, in the first month of the Jewish calendar, he would come with his troops to Jerusalem, because this was a time when revolution and revolt and unrest was very common, because all of the people were coming together. And nationally, this was a memorial, a remembering of the time when God set his people free. This was a time of remembering when they were captives in Egypt. Many years before, they'd been captives for 400 years in Egypt, and God came in and liberated them. And this was the most important festival for them to remember. And it's a time when they remembered that God set them free. So it was a time that stirred people, and it was a time when revolution was in the air, especially for occupying forces. So the Romans were there. Now, what would they have seen when they saw Jesus coming down? Well, they may have not been bothered about him because he may not have looked much of a threat, but people were gathering around him, and I think they would probably think that he was perhaps a sort of insurrection risk to them. Maybe he could have ignited some sort of revolt. So that was the Romans. Now, in the Jewish culture at the time, there were three main groupings, and we're just going to look at them, and they all had different routes, if you like, to get back to those golden era of the Jewish nation, and that coloured what they saw. And the first one we're going to look at are the Sadducees. So the Sadducees lived in Jerusalem. They were affluent people. Some think they might have been traders. There was just a whole group of very influential families, and they had a lot of political power, but they also ran the whole higher structure of the priesthood in the temple. So, and their philosophy, if you like, was that God helps those who help themselves. So their route to getting back to this golden era was actually through political alliances, manipulation, the handling of power, both through the temple and with the governor who was in charge. And they saw that as the way forward. So what would they have thought with this Galilean carpenter coming down the road on the donkey? Well, I think they would have just thought he was irrelevant. He has no power. He's not from any family that we know of. He's from Galilee, for goodness sake, from a nowhere village somewhere up north. He's of no consequence whatsoever. An irrelevant person. There was another group called the Zealots, which they weren't really organized as a group, but they were a whole load of people who, due to the amount of poverty that there was, took to violent acts to try and get enough food to eat, but also to try and overthrow the Roman occupiers. And they look back to that time when there was that revolt with the Judas Maccabeus. It wasn't that long before, really, about 100 years or so before. And they were looking for something similar to happen. And I think when they saw Jesus coming down that road, this was really this must have stirred them hugely. And there's a few reasons for that, really. One is they may well have heard about the fact that he raised somebody from the dead just a few miles up the road, literally a few days earlier. But the other was the significance of the day, because this day, which was the 10th day of the first month of the Jewish calendar, was the very day when they were released. Well, it was a little bit earlier from when they were released to Egypt, but it was the very day that they crossed the Jordan and entered the Promised Land for the first time. This very same day was the day when they arrived in the Promised Land for the first time. This was the time when they celebrated Passover for the very first time on the soil of the land that God had given them. And not only that, but the person who commanded them across, who led them across, was a guy called Joshua. Now that's English, but in the Hebrew, which is what they spoke at the time, it was Yeshua. And the Hebrew word Yeshua, when translated into Greek, which, you remember I said the Greeks had just totally taken over the culture and the language of Palestine at the time, Yeshua in Greek is Jesus. And Jesus in English is Jesus. So this Jesus coming down the hill on the very same day that Joshua, of the same name, led the people across the Jordan to take the Promised Land. They must have got that. And the fact that Jesus was coming down on this donkey in a regal way, I reckon really stirred their hearts. And what happened when somebody of importance or of somebody regal came down that path into the city, people would come out from the city to welcome them. And I'm just imagining great throngs of people, especially those of a zealot leading, would come in. And what did they do? Well, they were putting their cloaks down, but some of the other passages talk about them putting palm leaves down in front of him. And hence Palm Sunday. And palm leaves are a patriotic symbol to the Jewish nation. In fact, a revolt a few years later on produced a coin that they were going to use instead of the Roman coins. They were going to create their own currency, and on one side of that currency there's a picture just coming up, and that shows palm leaves on it, and it's, if you like, a real symbol of patriotism. And also what they were singing out, this words from Psalm 118, saying, "Blessed is the King who comes in the name of the Lord." And the original word for that is Hosanna, and that was a term that was used in revolt. It's God save us, and it was one of their cries of this group of people. So I reckon this was like, for all those groupings, I reckon this was probably a big day for the Zealots, because number one, this was the very date that Joshua took them into the Promised Land. Number two, this guy had raised somebody from the dead. Number three, here he was coming in. Things are going to change now. And in some ways they were right. So what were they thinking? What were they saying? Well, they were thinking revolution. Times are going to change. And that was true, but it wasn't in the way that they imagined. So we've thought about the Romans, we've thought about the Sadducees and the Zealots, and there's another big grouping that I'm sure you'll be familiar with, because Jesus often had head-to-head battles with them. This is the Pharisees. And their image, their way of trying to get back to this golden era of like when David and Solomon were in charge was through purity. So they felt that, okay, what we need to do is get God's law right, follow it to the letter, especially the laws about being unclean and clean. If we get that right, if we all get that right, God's going to intervene and change things for us. And that was sort of their mindset, and they were crazy nuts about getting everything right. But Jesus realized that so much of it just trapped people. It didn't liberate them. It wasn't something that set them free. It was something that set them up. So what about the Pharisees? What do they see? Well, let's just... they took exception to Jesus. And because he didn't really fit the mold for what they were looking for. He should have come from Bethlehem, and he came from Nazareth. Well, they didn't realize he'd been born in Bethlehem. And the way that he went about meeting with tax collectors, touching people who had leprosy, was all like the opposite of what they were trying to achieve. They thought that God wanted people to be so pure and separate, but no, actually Jesus was showing God wants to be involved. Our God is a God who steps in. So, what did they see when they saw Jesus? Well, I think they just saw an imposter, somebody who was making himself out to be the Messiah in the things that he said and he did, but there's no way he could have been. He doesn't fit in with our mindset. He's out. And there's one other group of people there, and that's the disciples, the people who come with Jesus all the way from the northern part of Galilee, come with him down through Jericho, walked with him, lived with him for 3 years. And what was on their minds when they saw him coming into Jerusalem down that road? Well, the weird thing is, I think they were just bewildered. We'll be reading a little bit later on, and it says just that. Jesus explained to them what he was going to be doing, and they didn't really get it. So of all these people looking at Jesus coming in, the Romans, possible insurrection, the Sadducees, just irrelevant. The Pharisees, he's an imposter. The disciples, I don't know what's going on. They all saw him differently, and none of them had 20/20 vision of who he truly was and what he was truly doing. And I also want to go and look behind the eyes of Jesus, because what did he see on this day? And let's just read that passage, because it tells us that. So this is Luke 19 from verse 41. As he approached Jerusalem and saw the city, remember that picture we had coming in high? You get this amazing picture, panorama of the whole city set out before him. And think about that city. This is the city that's going to arrest him with false charges. This is the city that's going to crucify him. This is the city where he's going to be betrayed, where he's going to be denied, where his disciples are going to run away from him. How does he respond? He wept. He wept over it and said, "If you, even you, had only known on this day what would bring you peace. But now it is hidden from your eyes. The days will come upon you when your enemies will build an embankment against you and encircle you and hem you in on every side. They will dash you to the ground, you and the children within your walls. They will not leave one stone on another, because you did not recognize the time of God's coming to you this very day." And I think for us, And any of us who are followers of Jesus, this has to speak so loudly to our hearts. Not so much how do we see Jesus, but how do we see others? Because it tells us how he sees others and how he sees his enemies, how he sees people that don't get it, how he sees people who think he's irrelevant. He weeps. And I don't know if you're like me, but my default position for my heart is judgment. I struggle with that. I really do. I'm so quick to judge. It's always the first thing that comes into mind. In fact, I might just take a detour. Don't worry, Sam, there aren't any slides for this. I was so convicted about this a few weeks back. I was driving to deliver something to post at the delivery office in Letchworth, and I was just sort of like you do, having a conversation in the car on the way there, and I just felt God saying, all you need to do is love people. I thought, oh, okay, right. So I get in the queue, I managed to get a place to park, come down, great long queue, socially distanced queue at the delivery office, hedge. So I'm standing here with my parcels, wasn't raining, yes. And this guy parks up and comes, he could have gone all the way round there. No, he didn't, he comes here. Oh, dear me. And I felt like, oh, don't you know there's a pandemic on? I just felt that rising up in me, and then I thought something check in my spirit, love him. Don't forget to love. So, and then we go forward in the queue, and we're moving forward, and we're moving forward, and we're moving forward. And I get to the front of the queue, and I'm waiting there, and I'm thinking, I don't know if you know, one of the things of being a Christian is there's like a conversation that goes on in your life with God and Jesus. I don't know if that's makes any sense to you. But anyway, I was at the front and I was thinking, okay, I've got to love. And literally, we might need to go to a wide shot for this. There's a guy who gets out of his car and he's got a pair of crutches and he's sort of carrying a whole load of things to deliver. And he gets out and he comes up and I'm sort of thinking, love him, right, okay. Hey, mate, would you like to come in front of me in the queue? Oh, cheers, thanks ever so much. And he comes in front of me. And we start this conversation going about the injury he's got to his leg and his kids. And I don't know how all that got started, but we did anyway. And I thought, yeah, why not? Do you want me to pray for you? So I asked him if he'd like me to pray for him. He said, oh, yeah, go on then. And then, bing, he got called in. So obviously that didn't happen. And it turned out somewhere in the conversation, I think after I'd offered that he was a believer. He was a believer. And that struck me, just that conversation, and led me to realize how important it is to check that judging spirit in me. Anyway, that was a little bit of a diversion, but this is so important for us as followers of Jesus. So important that Jesus looked over that city that essentially was going to crush him, and he wept. Not because of what he was going to experience, because what they just didn't get it. So that's a little bit of a detour. But we've been looking through the eyes of the Romans, we've been looking through the eyes of the Sadducees, we've been looking through the eyes of the Pharisees and his disciples, and finally we've been looking through the eyes of Jesus. Well, Jesus knew why he was there. This day, this very, very day, on the 10th day of the first month, was a very special day in the Passover festival. Remember I was saying there's tens of thousands of people gathering there. And what they did on this 10th day of the first month was they had to select their Passover lamb. They had to find that lamb without blemish that they were going to sacrifice 5 days later. So people were milling around trying to find enough faultless lambs for that sacrifice, lambs without defect. And this was the day that Jesus, the Lamb of God, was coming in to that city. And there's something about that, these people were thinking, we've got to get all these lambs to worship God, and yet God himself was coming in through a back door of the city on a donkey. And I think that's an amazing thing, because that's so often how God gets into our lives, how God gets our attention. Sometimes it's front page, but often it's just through the back door, and something clicks with something. A friend of ours recently came back to faith, and it wasn't through some great long lecture. It was just hearing a hymn clicking it through on their phone, and they heard this: my song is love unknown, my Saviour's love for me, love to the loveless shown, that they might lovely be. Who am I that for my sake he should take frail flesh and die? You may not be familiar with that hymn, but for that person, that was God coming in the back door of their lives, if you like, broke their heart and renewed their faith in him. So, Jesus knew what he was doing, and he had explained it to the disciples before. And I'm just going to read that bit to you it's just a little bit earlier on in Luke's account of Jesus' life. This is in chapter 18, verses 31 and 33. Jesus took the 12 disciples aside and told them, we are going up to Jerusalem, and everything that is written by the prophets about the Son of Man, that's himself, will be fulfilled. He will be delivered over to the Gentiles. They will mock him, insult him, spit on him. They will flog him and kill him. And on the third day he will rise again. The disciples did not understand any of this. Its meaning was hidden from them, and they didn't know what he was talking about. But Jesus knew exactly what he was doing. Every step of that journey, he knew exactly what he was doing. And something was going to happen 7 days later, something we're going to look at next week, that changed the world forever. Something happened that was so immense, the global calendar was stopped and reset. We've done that this morning, haven't we? We've had to reset. Well, I don't know if all your clocks are automatic, but I have to go around changing all our analog clocks forward. But this event that happened in a week's time was of such magnitude that the global calendar was restarted. I don't know if you've ever thought of that. Why did they do that? Why is it 2021? Why did it all just restart from the date of Jesus' birth? Because of what's going to happen on Easter Sunday. And I wanted to talk about this, about seeing Jesus differently, because nobody got it. But after that event next week, it broke through. They understood. It made sense. Jesus, well, I'm going to hold that for Easter, actually. But that's when it began to make sense for them. And I wanted to talk about this today because it's true for me. For me, seeing Jesus differently changed my life. And I just wanted to talk about that briefly. It was when I was 17 years old and my hair was only slightly longer than it is currently. And I thought Jesus was just a good person, basically. That's not on the list of what these people thought at the time. That wasn't on their agenda, really. That's like a 20th century idea that he could just be a good person. But I thought he was just a good person. I thought, decent person to be associated with. And then there was one RE lesson. I was in what would it be now? The year you do your GCSEs. Is that year 11? Yes. And I was in a class and we were looking at an event. We studied the Bible for our RE, so we did the whole of Mark's Gospel and then some bits in Matthew. And this was a bit about an event called the Transfiguration. And basically what happens is Jesus takes his 3 best buddies, they climb up a mountain and he starts to glow. and a cloud comes down and they can see Moses and Elijah with him. Totally weird, totally mind-blowing, and God speaks to them out of the cloud saying, "This," that's Jesus, "is my son, listen to him." And for me, that was like God coming in the back door. You know, I mentioned that. I suddenly thought, what? This is not just what a good man does. This is something off the wall. And then one lesson later on, a few lessons later on, I discovered he's coming back again. Did you know that? Jesus is coming back again. Jesus is not somebody past tense. He is somebody present tense, but he's somebody future. He's coming back. And that totally was news to me. And as part of my revision, I looked through Mark's Gospel. Mark's quite a short Gospel, read it in a super easy version, Good News Bible. And I read the whole thing in one evening, which is perfectly easy to do, even for somebody who's a bit slow at reading like me. And when I did that, the person of Jesus almost like took flesh, if you like. Just reading what he did, reading how he was. He just sort of came alive in a way, and I don't want to overemphasize it, but it was super significant for me about this man Jesus. I was beginning to see Jesus differently. And I wonder if that can be your story too. I wonder if you put Jesus in a box. I wonder if you put him in a box where you just say, irrelevant. What's that got to do with me? I'm not a Christian. I'm not really interested in that. Or do you see him just as a political revolution? He's got some amazing ideas about social reform. Is that how you see him? Or do you see him somebody who doesn't really tick all of the boxes of what you think somebody like that should be like? A bit like the Pharisees. Well, maybe now, maybe this Easter, maybe this is a time to see Jesus differently. And Joel mentioned at the beginning, we're running an Alpha course. Kicks off on the 15th of April, and that's a great place to come and explore who is Jesus. What does his life mean? Ask any questions you like. Totally safe place. We've said about it already, but just that would be a great place to come. And I think the other thing I want to just say in closing is, why did Jesus do this? Why did Jesus descend that hill into Jerusalem and give his life? Was it to set up a new political arrangement? Was it to set up a new religious system? Absolutely not. He did it because he wanted to bring you home. He did it because he loves you. And we're going to sing about that reckless love of God, that reckless love that got him to get on the back of a donkey, go down a hill, crowds of people who hadn't the faintest idea of who he was, what he was doing, God entering the back door of Jerusalem, but giving his life and changing the world because he wants to bring you home. Let's listen to that now.
Before I spoke a word, you were singing over me. You have been so, so good to me. Before I took a breath, you breathed your
you very much, Richard. Thank you so much for sharing with us this morning. I really appreciate that. I don't know about you, but I was really challenged at the end, that last line there where Richard just said this reckless love of God that got Jesus on a donkey to ride into a place where he was misunderstood and mistreated. I don't know about you, but I've had plenty of experiences in my life where I've hesitated at the door. You know those moments where you don't want to go into an environment because you know they already misunderstand you and possibly they mistreat you? Maybe it's happened at work. Maybe it happens with family gatherings. You know you don't want to just go back and cross over that doorway to be with people because you know in your heart of hearts, you know that you're misunderstood and mistreated. And I can't imagine fully what it would have felt like to do that. But to realize that Jesus did that because of us and because he wanted to show the world a whole new way to live life that's challenging and inspiring and restoring for us. And wherever you are in your faith journey, wherever you are at the moment exploring things or learning more, or maybe you followed Jesus ever since you were a young child, we all discover more about who Jesus is and his amazing, reckless love for us. I pray that this morning you've been able to hear something that not only has been helpful, but also hopeful. We would love to do whatever we can to help and journey with you, wherever you are on your journey. If you'd like to get in touch with us, please put something in the comments. You could put something in the chat there and we can get in touch with you. You can also contact us through the website. We would love to do whatever we can to journey and walk together. If I could just close now with a short prayer and then we'll finish our morning. Jesus, we thank you so much for what you've done. Thank you so much for reminding us again about this story that happened thousands of years ago, but is still so relevant for us today. Thank you. And thank you that you did something so immense and so epic and so huge that you reset the clock for all of the world. Thank you. And God, I pray for anyone who's watching today that you would just comfort them, that you would be with them, that you would guide them. We thank you that you are a light. And I pray that you would be the light to just show the next step for whatever people are facing today. And Father, in your wonderful name we pray. Amen. Thanks again so much for joining us. It has been an absolute joy and a delight to be together. We're going to be here again next week live from 10:20 when we start with a new Easter theme. So I really look forward to being together again with everyone. Have a great week. See you later. Bye-bye.